Mark Hollins, welcome to the studio. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Liverpool. How's it going?
Good, thanks, mate. Yeah, it's really good. Nice place.
How'd you feel being in Liverpool with that accent?
Yeah, right. I am actually from Yorkshire, so I've managed to spend a number of years not getting rid of it because I love my Yorkshire twang.
Oh, I thought you were from Swinton.
Yeah, in South Yorkshire. There's two.
I thought that was near Manchester.
And I used to work with a lot of offshore developers, and the Yorkshire accent wasn't very compatible. So yeah, I'm comfortable in Liverpool. Been to quite a few stag do's here, to be fair.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to not have a good night out here.
Yeah.
So this is off your LinkedIn. People will be able to see by the whites of your eyes if it's true or not, if it needs updating, or someone else wrote it. If you go, what? So apparently, you're a highly strategic and commercially astute business change consultant with particular strengths in leading a variety of product and operational initiatives to improve performance and profitability. You did that on purpose to make me say big words.
I did, yeah.
Is that true?
I think so. I had some help writing that because sometimes I find it really difficult to describe what we do, and I don't think you can very easily get it right. I'm not sure if this is a place to plug Benched, but I'm looking forward to your help in making that a little bit more transferable. But yeah, I think anything to do with change, I know we'll probably touch on the A word throughout this conversation, but that sounds pretty much what I do at a high level with lots of fancy words.
Cool. All right. So I don't know how much of this you watch. I'll never assume, but I'll start. And I've got like this little tradition where I'll dive into someone's LinkedIn during the research. I call it research. It's just stalking people's LinkedIn, really, and try and get the meaning behind it. So, I'm not going to read the whole thing out because it was quite a long post, but it was the title was "Read this before jumping feet first into Scrum Mastery." I've been thinking about some of the best Scrum Masters I've worked with and how much was learned behavior versus revealed personality. And then you went on to say the Scrum Master is often a misunderstood role, so it's easy to see how it's evolved into many shapes and forms through the certification boom. And while some of this adds value to anyone who participates, the best seem to be a perfect fit for the role at the core level. I believe the market reset has actually been useful to address some of this, and the Scrum Master's role, as intended, will take a slight revival as those who know the value and will find more people who belong in the job. You'll be glad I didn't read the whole thing out. But yeah, what triggered that post? What's been on your mind there?
Well, I guess a few things made me think about that. I always think that I know that there's been a lot documented about the current state of the market for this type of work, consultancy, and anybody who's not what people would deem a traditional IC, under understandable scrutiny when things get a little bit more difficult. And I was thinking about the role, and after I wrote that post, I thought you could say this about many other jobs. But what's particularly interesting about this one is the way to measure the value of a Scrum Master is, I think, quite difficult in comparison to some other roles. And having a boom, which I think is also well documented, that over the probably 3 or 4 years ago, where it became a trend, and people who were doing similar types of change roles, quite rightly, wanted to learn more about it and get involved and practice it, meant that the market was probably a little bit saturated, both from a supply and demand perspective.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people went and thought, we need a Scrum Master. We've got to put Scrum in, even if we don't know what that is. And then we'll take people to do the job. And what that's inadvertently done, from my observation, is because if you're not, I'm going to say like destined to not to be too cringy to do this type of work, it's a struggle. I think I mentioned the fact that there's quite a lot of imposter syndrome involved in it, and if you're not sort of experienced, you can get pressured into turning it into an admin role.
Yeah.
And then people started to see that as an admin role. And you're the person who schedules the meetings or workflow tools. You update those, you take minutes, you do this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden you've lost the essence of what it's for.
Yeah.
And I think by correcting the market, what will survive is Scrum Mastery as intended. And that's as much for people who want to hire Scrum Masters as it is for people who are thinking about getting involved in it. Because it does take a lot of, I guess, bravery, sometimes a lot of compromise, and patience, to try and get across what actually businesses need when they want a Scrum Master. And I still truly believe that the vast majority of business could, and I wish the job title was different, but would benefit from that type of person. I just think the market may have quite rightly reset onto the people who know why they need it are going to hire for it, and the people who know why it exists and how to practice it will apply for the role. So it was just an observation, really nothing to take away. Maybe a little bit more reassurance that it's still a thing.
Yeah, very much so. So if we rewind a bit, what's the career path journey at a high level been so far for you to be in the position where you can put yourself in that position to be an experienced agile practitioner?
Yeah, great question. One of your prep questions was great. Like, what led you here? And I translated that to say, as in literally sat on this couch.
Yeah, a few people say that. Maybe that's feedback for me.
No. I think it's a great question though, because it made me really think, and it applies to both being here on this couch and being in this role. For instance, not to go too far back on this point, but in my early 20s, I, and still to some extent, suffered from quite acute anxiety. And having tried to solve that in many ways that people do when they first find out what it is, a lot of the success that I got from coping with that was by taking myself out of the comfort zone. And that's very much harder said than done. And since I started practicing that, and since I started finding those ways to cope with that, I then started to find that I was putting myself out of my comfort zone at work. So at the time I was working in a contact center. I did some work on some spreadsheets. I got into the planning department. That led to a couple other contact center planning jobs, which led to project management, across some operational warehouses for a bank. And then whilst doing that job about 15 years ago, I started to meet consultant project people, consultant change people, and that opened my eyes to consultancy. So I did that for a couple of years. Back in another bank, we started to experiment with Scrum, right in, I guess, not the very early days, but I guess it's second wave. And I kind of just sort of thought, I always felt like a little bit of a black sheep as a project manager. I could help and facilitate teams to get results and deliver successful projects, but always felt like I wasn't the traditional project manager, polished or however you want to say it. And that's absolutely no criticism to people that do that. So when I found out about Scrum Mastery and that it's almost the inverse way of achieving that outcome from the command and control model to the self-management model, it kind of just spoke to me. That I kind of thought, well, this is what I did. This is the way that I approach projects. So I offered myself up to be a Scrum Master on a new project there, and just fell in love with it, and just fell in love with the habit, the ritual, the discipline. And I'll probably waffle on a little bit more about that later, but it just felt like me. And then from there, gaining lots of experience as a Scrum Master and a few more roles since that, I got to know more Scrum Masters, know more people who are practicing, more people who had Scrum Masters, who asked me to come and help and maybe help their Scrum Masters. And since then, I've sort of been doing hybrid, whatever it takes kind of change management, where you take all the good principles of any of these frameworks and any of these methodologies and ultimately get business outcomes. So the last 5 or 6 years has been more, whilst I've been a practice Scrum Master working with teams, I've also been doing a lot of that on a fractional basis, where I work with clients who already have those people in place.
Yeah.
And to my earlier point, I probably only had 1 or 2 experiences of the role, and they themselves knew that they would need some actual on-the-job help. And it's been thoroughly enjoyable. Yeah, I love doing it. It just feels right.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, to the point, final point, out of my comfort zone, on your couch.
It's all right. On the casting couch.
On the casting.
What are you two laughing at? Don't know what you're alluding
No
to.
idea.
Don't know what you mean. So what does Agile mean to you?
Yeah, moving on. I was thinking about this in the car. It's a really hard one to answer. One of the simplest way I thought to describe what it means to me, and this won't resonate with lots of people, but it really makes sense to me. And a good friend of mine who has a startup now, a very successful startup, we've always said that to pivot well, I think you have to have, and this just sounds like such an oxymoron, but I'm going to say it, you have to have strong opinions that are loosely held. So lots of conviction, driving forward, but the moment the data or the circumstance or the climate changes, I think agility is the vulnerability to perhaps reconsider those strong opinions and change direction. And I think that's where I see a lot of teams struggle with things like sunk cost fallacy, for example. So yeah, in a nutshell, strong opinions loosely held would be right at the core of agility for me.
I like it. I'll swap these questions around, but where do you find organizations face the most challenges when you go into a place?
Yeah. I don't want to sound too obvious, but it's my experience. I think transparency of work. I think there's a significant amount of unseen work in organizations.
Like side of desk stuff.
Exactly.
People are working on it.
Yeah, which ultimately makes progress, work in progress, a problem, context switching a problem, planning a problem, pivoting a problem. And I think, so when I say transparency, what I mean is a lot of teams have unseen work, and we're all optimistic planners, and we all are involved in some way in a planning process, hopefully regularly in terms of planning is better than plans. But unseen work is a problem. So getting down to measuring that and making sure that's considered in any decision making, and communication, which ultimately influences alignment. I think no matter, you have to try really hard to avoid silos. And I think that's what I love about the sort of boring basic discipline of things like Scrum. Now I know that there's lots of facets to think about when it comes to Scrum, but the habits of a high performing team around meeting in some format for a few minutes every morning and communicating and staying on the same page, pausing every few weeks to look back on how we got to where we were today. Yeah. Do you know those and I think whilst there's a lot, what I find is whilst a lot of teams practicing that, let's call it rigor, it can also have the adverse effect if it's not practiced well. I think it can cause sort of dysfunction and disengagement.
What does not well mean to you?
So, I mean, as you and I will have seen on LinkedIn, there's various sort of insights onto retros and daily stand-ups and how you do what did you do yesterday? What did you say? And just survive. Like there's a lot of surviving those events rather than making the most of it. And they can just be a couple of minutes. If we're all on the same page, you can make the most out of aligning every day. Retrospectives that are that don't yield any improvement, that don't measure anything. planning sessions that, and you did a great video the other day on planning that go through the motions, that pack the sprint with loads of stuff without any goals and optimize for busyness. So whilst I truly believe, and I think you and I talked about, again, like Scrum mastery, Scrum as a practice or a methodology or whatever the right word is, making a bit of a resurgence, it's those that do it that get the most out of it.
Yeah.
Rather than, as a friend of mine called Darren talks a lot about, theatre. Rather than doing the theatre of Scrum, you actually get the value out of it.
So do you think like Scrum mastery can be taught? That was something you seemed quite interested in talking about.
Yeah. I think it can, to a degree, of the processes and tools. But the best Scrum Masters I've worked with just seem to be, you seem to reveal them. Like you find Scrum and you learn about it and you just go, this just makes sense at a different level than the intricacies of the process and the tools. So I think Scrum can be taught and get you so much value. But I think you'd have to have someone who just really gets the essence of it, and the fact that it's all about the team and continuous improvement and pivot. So yeah, I think it's hard to teach someone from on the competency framework from incompetence to fully competent as a Scrum Master, particularly. But I think we can definitely leverage a lot of learning from teaching the teams themselves about how Scrum should work.
Yeah. So you've been parachuted into a new organization, or not a new organization to you, a client. What does the first month or so look like from your point of view? What you're up to, what you're doing, any workshops, techniques, getting the donuts in, like what you do.
Yeah, pizzas. I like to do and be very transparent about kind of an observation phase, at least entering with an observation phase. One of the things that I do practice as often as I can is to meet the team before I'm hired. Yeah. And one of the most powerful questions I ever ask, and I do it with absolute completely genuine when I ask this question, but why do you think you're hiring a Scrum Master? What do you think this person's going to come in and do, and why? And one of the biggest things that I learned early in my career was to try and focus on the barriers to entry, and sort of any resistance is useful, not offensive. So to try and optimize around reducing the barriers to entry is one of my focus in the first 30 days. And I do that more by learning about what it's like here now than what I've had or done before. Some of that will become useful eventually. Yeah. But I think to truly understand, and when I call it this observation phase, and actually I use that opportunity quite often to write down and visualize in whatever format what is going on. How are people structured? How are they organized? Yeah. How do things get done? And what I often find is that no one's ever visualized that before because it's kind of just emerged over time. So even if after that first 30 days, they were like, do you know what, actually everything's all right, then they've got some value straight away. They can see how they work. What that allows me to do is make, from experience so far, is make some very quick changes. If it's introducing some type of metric around their workflow, practicing Kanban instead of Scrum to address work in progress problems, and just experiment really early on, but measurably. I'll also offer to, especially if they've already got people in situ, I'll also offer to facilitate some of their ceremonies. I'm a firm believer in the distinct difference between facilitator and participant. And I think we add a lot of value as facilitators. I've even been asked, I'm sure you're the same, I've even been asked just to facilitate some meetings that, do you know what I mean, that people were struggling with. So yeah, that first 30 days is a lot about genuinely building trust that I'm not going to come in and with all these opinions and take over and tell people what to do. I'm there to figure out what to do with them.
Yeah. And what do you do with people who perceive you as just another consultant, or like someone who may have too much influence with without any context in the organization?
Yeah.
This is more of a people maybe want, finding themselves in that position.
Definitely. My first step is to accept that that's always going to happen. And if you go into a place and try and win everyone over, not only are you going to waste a lot of time, you're going to actually miss out on the people who are genuinely up for trying some new stuff. Now, that's not to say that the people who are resistant at first or have that opinion aren't valid. Their views aren't valid or bad in any way. But some people just need a little bit longer to get on board. And so I would never sort of single everyone out and go, oh, this guy's up for it, I'm going to ignore this person. But I always like to try and gauge and gain momentum with people who are up for trying new stuff. So it's always helpful if there's a few teams and let's try with this team. And prove the changes rather than theorize and end up in endless debates. So I think my advice to anyone would be just accept that you are going to go into places and people are going to think that, and that's absolutely fine. I'm sure that they've got historical reasons why they feel like that.
Yeah.
But try and focus on where the energy is to make early changes to demonstrate what we're doing is worthwhile.
Love that. You also touched on secondhand feedback. What is it? What do you mean? And what are your thoughts on it? All wrapped up in one long question.
It's quite an embryonic subject, if that's the right word. But one interesting thing about being a consultant is you're not engaged in the performance management frameworks of a company. Your performance is basically based on results, and that's why you're there to win or lose, right? Or be successful or not. But you can't help but observe how prevalent secondhand feedback is. And what I mean by secondhand feedback, and it's a tricky topic because having worked in HR teams recently as well, there's some absolutely vital secondhand feedback, i.e. I'm going to tell Jack something about someone else with the intention that he will act on that for me and provide that. And there are situations where that is necessary, very uncomfortable situations at work that I'm sure lots of people have experienced. But I would say the majority of secondhand feedback, we could live without. And that whole dynamic, sometimes third-hand feedback I've witnessed recently, where the message gets filtered and to the point where you're not even sure as a recipient where the source is.
Yeah.
So you're now guessing who else has said something about it. And the fact that we've got performance management frameworks that absolutely rely on it, keep this behavior alive. Now, I'm not suggesting there's a perfect alternative or I've even got an answer to it, but one of my observations was if I would personally prefer if people were empowered to refuse it. That sounds controversial, but only because it's hard to use in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I also agree. I agree, but I think there's also an emphasis on the people who receive that secondhand feedback to go, because I've set a bit of a challenge at the moment to people and myself. If someone comes to me to give secondhand feedback, I'll go, and how did the person react when you told them this directly?
Great question.
And they go, well, I haven't told them. Well, now I try and not in an unkind way, but I try and invite them to go and give that person that feedback. And it's really nice to see when you see the two people going off.
Amazing. And I'm not saying you could switch to this world. People would need a lot of help to turn that into firsthand.
Yeah.
But it's just more of a dream. Imagine if we could get to a place where we're all comfortable having that direct conversation. Even good, positive
Yeah,
compliment.
It doesn't have to be negative.
It doesn't. No. But I think people should just be cautious that, and to your point, great solution there. That to be really mindful that if you're gonna participate in secondhand feedback, it absolutely has some negative connotations.
Yeah.
And
I've seen receiving bad feedback, do we? Like, we can be open to it, but I don't think if we're all honest, anyone likes it.
No, and I think it's hard to divorce the, like you say, how well do I cope with feedback versus am I just offended that I'm getting secondhand feedback? Like, there's a lot of layers to the topic.
That's also an us problem.
It is exactly right. I would never want to have this topic and conversations and come across as someone scorned by secondhand feedback. But I observe it in my role, and I observe the impact it has then in creating a high performing team, because the trust is lower, the suspicions rise, and
I think there's an emphasis on the person to be given it, not to make it personal, to make it fact based. And there's also a person, if they're open to receiving it, by saying this doesn't mean I'm a shit person. It just means I could think about things in a different way. Because we're all,
we all need feedback as well.
Yeah, and we're all sensitive as well.
We are super sensitive.
We are, like, none of us likes to be called out, really.
Yeah.
We say we do, but we don't really like.
No, exactly. And it's like we're adding interest onto that sensitivity by dealing with it secondhand.
Yeah.
Because almost now you've got two people.
Then it's just gossip.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think you've got a great piece of advice there to just ask that innocent question. How did they deal with it when you told them? But yeah, just these little things you see in any organization have a profound impact on how well teams perform and get stuff done.
Yeah. It does it's a massive change over some.
That's huge. It's huge. I actually, a friend of mine who's my coach in my early days doing this, we went into an organization and they really recognized they had a problem with it. And the leadership team actually practiced not giving it for a period of time. And it was evidently uncomfortable. Not that we enjoyed that, but it certainly provided that discomfort to level them up as a team.
Yeah, but if they're not doing it,
lead by example, right?
Yeah. What does good Scrum Mastery look like in your mind?
I think good Scrum Mastery puts the textbook away. And rarely refers to it. And when I'm thinking about how to answer this question, I'm thinking about what not good Scrum Mastery looks like and trying to invert that. But I've been in a tiring amount of debates around story points. And this is not debates that I often participate in, but I've seen debates where two people on a call of 10 are debating a topic for a long time and it's never interrupted or stopped because those two people, one of them being a Scrum Master, feels like it's valuable. So I think anybody who doesn't get caught up in the processes, whilst also helping the team build the habits of good discipline. So if there was a Maslow of a high performing team, I think people probably think about the top end of it. We nail valuable products, we iterate quick, we release constantly, we constantly engage with our customers. But I think a lot of teams that I've met sort of fall short on level one, which is in a triangle would be the biggest level, which is what are our brilliant basics as a team. So I think a Scrum Master caring about how teams align and reflect and make realistic, achievable plans that challenge how we deliver value. And I think Scrum Master needs to go a little bit. There's so much debate about should Scrum Masters be technical or not. I don't think it's a 0-1. Like if it was a scale, I'd probably be halfway because I think good Scrum Masters have a grasp of what the team are talking about, a good enough grasp to intervene where value is not being made or progress is not being made.
Or when they're bullshitting you.
Well, yeah,
That's like when they're pulling the wool over your eyes.
Yeah, 100%. So I think good Scrum Masters get things to enough of a level that they can add value to the team. And some of the examples I've personally had, because I'm genuinely interested in what's being made and what's being produced by the team. It allows you to see things that the team wouldn't. So I think good Scrum Masters gain enough context that they can find the teams and organizational blind spots, surface them, and create an action plan to remove them. Because a lot, as people will know, a lot of impediments that teams face and blockers, and Scrum Masters should remove blockers, often exist outside the team, systemic around the team. So I think a good Scrum Master cares about progress, cares about what the team are building, gets to a point where they understand it enough to genuinely help, not just be a facilitator, which is also important. Yeah. But is also confident enough to address some of the organizational pains that we all see. And I was thinking in the car on the way here, was one of the, it definitely doesn't mean it doesn't happen as much now, but one of the faux pas of the industry was to introduce the Agile coach role, for example, because it kind of probably compounded what we were talking about at the top of the call, that you're a scrummy and you sit down here and you just deal with the team, and I'm the super Scrum Master who deals with the organization. Whereas actually the Scrum Master and the team probably see a lot of dysfunction from the organization coming in.
Well, if you throw the book at it, the Scrum Master serves.
Yeah, exactly.
The team and the organization. If we're gonna
contradict my earlier point about the book, yeah, you're absolutely right.
But yeah, I know what you mean. So is it fair to delivery manager, Scrum Master, what I think sometimes I've just asked you a question and answered it, but just to provide the context, sometimes I think Scrum Mastery or Scrum Masters, they get a bit pigeonholed.
Yeah.
When actually might not be the right thing. You alluded to, Kanban, other way of making up your own. My question is, what's your thoughts on the increasing demand for delivery managers? Is it a cop-out because they don't want to do Scrum anymore?
Maybe. I mean, I have a lot of conversations, and I've done a lot of what have been classed as delivery lead roles over the last 3 years.
Is that a market thing though, because you wanted to?
No, I think it's probably because I felt, to your point about being pigeonholed, that I'd outgrown the what had then become an evolving definition of this role.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good chat on about whether Scrum Masters should care about delivery, and absolutely in my view, 100%. In a day like today, where, I mean, we could have a full topic on the word accountability, but I think they have to have some skin in the game when it comes to getting stuff done. So I can understand it. I think, as I probably mentioned before, that the job title of a Scrum Master is problematic. And I'm not sure what the alternative word for it would be, which is why you're now seeing you want delivery leads to make sure the team's continuous improving and adopting new ways of working and all the great stuff we do as Scrum Masters, plus having an outward facing kind of role on making sure things get done.
Yeah. Where else do you draw inspiration, motivation from outside of the Agile bubble?
I over the last, certainly the most recent part of my career, have been working with startups, and know some great founders, and they're being involved in that beyond the realms of what I would traditionally help teams with is fantastic. You sort of then start to get interested in how companies start and how founders think and how complicated it is to start the year with one direction and pivot at a macro scale. So I found myself more out, and I often work with CEOs and stuff like that, although my absolute value is with the teams. So I draw inspiration from the fact that sometimes the people at that level have to make crazy level decisions, like huge impact decisions, and just being with them and sitting through their thought process. And talked about bravery earlier. I think all good Scrum Masters are brave, and the further you get up the chain, the more bravery in a lot of places. I know there's some very conservative people who run companies, but I think taking that inspiration from that kind of group, people who are trying and starting out, and I'm just starting to see more and more people starting new things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not. I've kind of. I love reading, and you and I have interacted quite a few times on the inner circle debates, the bubble.
Yeah.
But eventually you want to get out of that, and you want to start thinking about how businesses run. And I talk quite a lot about Scrum Masters not being commercial enough, for example. So yeah.
I mean, is there a question or anything on your mind that I should have asked but haven't so far?
Not really. No.
This is about you sharing your views of the world. Or the Agile world, anyway.
The Agile world, yeah. I'm just trying to think of some of the interesting topics. I would tell you one thing. One thing, it kind of links back to, secondhand feedback. But basically, there's another recurring theme. Two things, I think. What roles that try and shift the dial, again, that are probably the furthest away from IC.
Yeah.
In individual contributors. Forgive me for that. I see there's a huge correlation between the sort of how the world is performing financially and what the sentiment is around the world, and those roles being available. But what that then increases is a different type of language around accountability. Now, one thing that, whilst we're seeing this sort of market trend, I'm starting to see an increase in conversations around accountability. And it's just fascinating to see how people understand the word. I'm not sure anyone truly understands it, but what I've observed, and I'll give you some specific examples, is people being associated with projects as a product lead or whatever title that is, and they are accountable for it. Yet they have to come to steercos to approve decisions. They don't have any budgetary ownership.
Yeah.
The client has to approve this. Someone else decides what people get to work on their project. How could you? And it's not about avoiding the responsibility or accountability, but how can you be if there's so many things,
so many layers to the decision making?
Yeah, so many things that are outside of your control. Where's the value in actually talking about who's accountable, unless you're going to make someone truly accountable? And I think that if you get that right, it's not a single throat to choke position. It's super empowering. I think a lot of people would step into the accountability, what people are looking for, but it's really hard, really confusing for people who are on the hook for projects, and someone else is deciding a multitude of factors which influence that delivery. So yeah, I've seen a really interesting increase in that, let's call it old-fashioned language and single throat to choke, and who's on the line for this. And yet those people who often find themselves in that space aren't given the tools or autonomy to actually take account.
Yeah. That's fair. What do we do about it? What's the solution in your perfect world?
Ideally, you would give people exactly what they need to take that on. Like, I don't think you'd want to go, chop it up a little bit and get into committees. And I think if you're truly going to give someone a role to do and you want them to be empowered to deliver it, I think you need to allow them to have the people decide when they start, make decisions around prioritization.
Yeah.
I think the solution is to give them the thing that you're asking them to do properly, rather than giving them this pseudo accountability that they can't really act upon. Yeah. But again, it's another one of those sort of cultural tweaks that genuinely impacts what people are trying to achieve, which is getting stuff done.
And takes a lot of time and effort.
Exactly.
What's next for you? What's on the horizon?
I am enjoying working with a couple of clients, building some cool stuff, building some cool teams. And right now, I think for the next few years, it'd be great to do more of the same. I've not actually figured out, and actually, when I thought back about the path of my career, whilst it might sound dangerous, apart from having the ultimate goal of being retired on a beach with my wife, letting the kids come and visit us when they want. Yeah. From a career perspective, I kind of just like what I'm doing and then iterate on it.
It's a good position to be in.
Yeah, right back from when I worked in a call center, it seems like you make little choices and other doors open that you didn't know about. Yeah. I've never been great at sort of looking at this one thing and going for it. This is not me.
You got anything to plug?
No,
fine. Well, are you happy for people to reach out? And if so, where can they do so?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Mark Hollins.
Link will be in the
link will be in the description. If you want to have a chat, I would love to help. If any teams or any companies are confused about how to get value from Scrum or any ways of working or delivery management, project management, I always like to bring a different view.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
No, this was really comfortable, actually, mate. Yeah. I was very nervous about it. But no, it's great to explore these topics with you. Perfect. Thank you for having me.
No, thanks for coming. Thank you very much.
All right.